Hey everybody, welcome to the video. It's going to be my first look for Week 10. Yeah, Week 10 already of the NFL season over on Draftkings. If you want to follow the socials, they're in the bottom left-hand corner, or bottom left-hand corner of your screen. And if you want to support the channel over on Patreon, that is always much appreciated. Links down in the description below for that. You can get access into the entire NFL DFS data sheet, and you can have into the Discord chat as well. And if you find this video helpful in any way possible, please leave a like. And if you're new to the channel, hit that subscribe button. It really helps me out. I really do appreciate it. 50% of the people watching these videos are not yet subscribed. So if you're a frequent visitor of the channel, I really would appreciate that. And without further ado, let's dive right into it. And as always, we'll start with the quarterbacks. And for the most part, as my first glance, I think it's a good week to spin up a little bit for quarterbacks. Now, I only have two guys above 7K listed here, but there's plenty of other good options as well, even though they're not on this sheet. Russell Wilson, Josh Allen are a couple that come to mind, and I know they're not on here, but I still think they're playable. It's just like some other guys at similar price points, but they are definitely in play as well. There's a lot of good spin-up quarterbacks this week, and with Christian McCaffrey potentially being out, we'll have Mike Davis at $4,000, meaning we can kind of spend up at quarterback this week without really much of a hassle. We're going to start up top with Kyler Murray at $8,000. He's our QB1 this week, and I love this game for fantasy purposes, and I love Kyler Murray for fantasy purposes pretty much each and every single week. The guy just does not have bad games. He's kind of like the 2019 version of Lamar Jackson this year, but this is going to be a really good game for fantasy purposes. They are playing Buffalo, and it's a 56.5 point over-under, and they have a team total of nearly 30 this week, and it's only a 2-point spread, so this should be pretty back and forth for the most part. Both defenses have certainly given up some points this season. Now, if you're looking at Buffalo's numbers versus the past this year, 15th DVOA, and they're allowing 21.9 DraftKings points per game to quarterbacks, which I know it shows up red, but that's still 21st in the league. Everyone else here has some really good matchups, but the thing I like the most about Kyler Murray is his rushing ability. Like, he has been absolutely excellent in the run game so far this season. Nearly double-digit rush attempts per game, a rushing touchdown per game, 7.1 yards per carry, and nearly 70 rushing yards per game as well. He's pretty much giving you a 1.5 passing touchdown floor built in with his rushing upside, so absolutely love Kyler Murray. He has been on fire all season long. And his worst game this year is 24 points. Like, I know he's super expensive, but when you roster Kyler Murray, it's the same situation as Lamar Jackson last year. I said last season I wasn't a big fan of spending up for quarterbacks. That's kind of changed this season because these spend-up quarterbacks have just been putting up a boatload of points, and pretty much the value quarterbacks haven't really been working out as much. Now, I know Drew Lock last week, which he's on here again, he absolutely balled out in the second half in that game, so he made up for it, but these spend-up quarterbacks have been scoring so many points, it's kind of been worth spending up for him. With Kyler Murray, you're getting a QB1 and an RB1 mixed in together, so I think he's worth his price point. I know he's super expensive, but if you can find the value for him, it would not surprise me if he has another 100-plus rushing yard game, gets into the end zone on the ground, and probably throws a couple of touchdowns. So definitely like Kyler Murray, and it should be a very competitive game. And that's not something I can really say for the next guy we're going to talk about, in Aaron Rodgers. He's pretty expensive at $7,900, and the thing is, they're 14-point favorites here, meaning it might be more of an Aaron Jones game, which does give me some concern for Aaron Rodgers' upside. But he is certainly capable of having a very good game. I said similar things when Patrick Mahomes were facing off. Patrick Mahomes and the Chiefs were facing off versus the Jets as 20-point favorites. I said when he's on the field, he's probably going to crush. It's just a matter of how those touchdowns go, because if it's a bunch of rushing touchdowns and defensive touchdowns and Patrick Mahomes comes out of the game early, it's probably not going to work out. But Mahomes, he threw for like 400 some yards. I think he had 4 or 5 touchdowns, just absolutely crushed. And we could see a similar situation here with Aaron Rodgers, and the Packers defense hasn't exactly been great this season. So there's always an off chance this game stays at least a little bit competitive, but I do think the Packers should be able to handle the Jaguars quite easily, especially at home. But very soft matchup here for the Packers and Aaron Rodgers. They have a 33-point implied team total, which is one of the high. I think it's the highest on the entire slate. And Rodgers has been fantastic this season, averaging close to 300 yards passing per game, 3 passing touchdowns per game, and overall has been very, very strong. Now, he doesn't give you the super high floor of Kyler Murray because he doesn't really run the ball. I mean, less than a rushing attempt per game, and 0 rushing touchdowns on the season, but excellent matchup here through the air. The Jaguars are 32nd DVA versus the pass, and they're allowing the 3rd most points per game to quarterbacks. So Aaron Rodgers, I do think is a very good option, but if you had to pick between him or Kyler Murray, I would expect that Kyler Murray game to be a lot more competitive, and he gives you a super high floor with his rushing ability and a super high ceiling as well. That's back-to-back 41-point fantasy point games from Kyler Murray. So I like Aaron Rodgers, but I view him as more of a tournament option compared to Kyler Murray if you're going top dollar this week. And I know I don't have them listed on here, but Josh Allen and Russell Wilson are both viable as well. I just don't want to list every single quarterback. And then getting down to a more mid-range tier, we have Deshaun Watson at $6,900, and I just think he's a little bit underpriced and a really good matchup versus Cleveland. And this should be a pretty good game for fantasy purposes as well. And they're also a 3.5-point dog, so if they're playing from behind, I always like Deshaun Watson when he's playing from behind because he just tends to have some really good fantasy games. But a 53.5-point over/under, and I think a lot of points should be scored in this game. Both these defenses are just not that good at all. And Watson, he's been playing very well the past, I think, 5 or 6 weeks. I know the previous 4 weeks before last week, he threw for over 300 passing yards each game. Only got 281 in the last game, I believe, but still, overall, a very solid game. In the options to pair him with, they're quite easy. You just pick Brandon Cooks and Will Fuller for the most part. Both those guys had some pretty solid games last week versus the Jaguars. And he's getting the ball down the field. I mean, nearly 9 yards per attempt, which is the highest on this list, and near 70% completion percentage. Doesn't really run the ball too much compared to someone like Kyler Murray, but still averaging about 25 rushing yards per game, which is not bad. He's got some rushing ability. We know that. But this is a good matchup versus Cleveland. They're 20th DVA versus the pass, and they're allowing 22.7 DraftKings points per game to quarterbacks, which is ranked 24th in the league. So definitely like Deshaun Watson. I could see this game shooting out, and I feel like he's a bit underpriced. I think we could see him at around 7,500, but we're getting below 7K this week, and I could definitely see him being the popular cash game quarterback this week for sure. Then dropping down to Jared Goff at $6,500. This should be another good game for fantasy purposes. We have a 55.5-point over/under in this game, and the Rams have a really nice 29-point implied team total, and this is a pretty good matchup versus the Seattle Seahawks. Now, I don't know if you guys remember this, but last week in week 8, well, I guess not last week, but they were in a bye week, but the week before that, Jared Goff threw the ball 61 times in that game versus Miami, which was absolutely insane. I think Cooper Kupp had 20 targets. It's absolutely crazy. Didn't really do too much damage. Only had 17.2 fantasy points because he only had a touchdown, but this is a great matchup versus Seattle. Pretty much the worst team versus quarterbacks this season. They're right up there with Atlanta, but they're 29 DVA versus the pass. They're allowing 30.4 DraftKings points per game to quarterbacks, and it's crazy. It's so hard to believe these numbers, but nearly 400 passing yards per game. Jared Goff, he's got some good options in Cooper Kupp and Robert Woods. $6,500, I think he's a fine mid-range quarterback. Would I prefer getting up to Deshaun Watson for $400 more? Sure, but I do think Jared Goff is a very nice tournament play to pair with his Robert Woods and Cooper Kupp. So definitely like Jared Goff. This matchup is fantastic versus the Seahawks, and it should be a pretty back-and-forth game for the most part as well. Then after Jared Goff, we have some value options, and Tua here at $5,600. He didn't have like an explosion game last week, but it wasn't too bad either. Andy showed some rushing upside as well. He ran the ball 7 times, only for 35 yards, but that's nearly a passing touchdown, 3.5 fantasy points on the ground. And he threw for 250 yards too with 21.4 fantasy points. So it's a good matchup here versus the Chargers. They don't have the worst defense in the world by any means. They're 14th DVA versus the pass, but they're 27 versus quarterbacks, allowing nearly 24 DraftKings points per game. So Tua at $5,600, I think he's an interesting option because he does offer us some rushing upside as well. And then Drew Lock, $5,500. Last week's hero. I was a little bit worried about that because I know in my lineup building video, personally I went Josh Allen when it came to it in my cash game lineup. And I felt really good about that after Josh Allen's game, but then Drew Lock almost just matched Josh Allen's numbers, and I was like, well, shoot, I should have just played Drew Lock. But definitely like Drew Lock last week, and he balled out. I mean, it took him a while because he was looking awful in the first half. He was getting flamed on Twitter, which I totally get. I don't think the guy's that great, but ended up having a very, very solid fantasy day. I think he had around, 35 fantasy points, and he's thrown the ball over 40 times the past 3 weeks now. So if we see similar production, not saying he's going to get 30 plus points again. You don't need 30 plus points at 5,500, but it's a good matchup versus Vegas, and we have a 52-point over/under in this game, and they're 5.5-point dogs, so I could see them throwing the ball quite a bit once again. And if you're looking at his numbers, they're a bit skewed because he did leave that one game early with an injury, so these numbers are all a little bit lower on a per-game basis than they really could be. But good matchup versus the Raiders. They're 26 DVA versus the pass, and they're ranked 26 versus quarterback. So Drew Lock, I think he's a fine value option. But to be honest, my lean this week is to spend it at quarterback, because especially if Christian McCaffrey's out, because then we have a 4K running back that's going to be able to pass in a game and pretty much get us 20-plus touches. So I don't really see a big reason to want to spend on a quarterback this week, but there's definitely some builds that it could end up working out. But my hunch right now, it's only Tuesday, so it could change, but my hunch right now is to go from like Jared Goff and up for the most part. And then with that being said, we'll move on to the running back position, which I think is a fun position this week. So we're going to start up top with Aaron Jones at 7,100. Last time he played was on Thursday night, and he was very iffy to play, but he ended up playing and pretty much saw a decent-sized role. Now, I'd expect him to be fully good to go for this one, and it's a fantastic matchup versus Jacksonville, and I think this game sets up very well for him, and I think he's underpriced. I think he could be closer to 8K, so I think Aaron Jones should end up being a very popular play this week, but I do think it's for good reason. They're 14-point favorites at home versus a very trashy defense in the Jaguars, and they have a 33-point implied team total, which is the highest on the slate. And he's having a very good year. He's going to be a capable pass catcher as well. He's got a 17% target share in the season. And this is just a good offense, and Aaron Jones is a really good running back. They're 21st DVA versus the run, and they're allowing nearly 30 DraftKings points per game to running backs. So Aaron Jones, he seems like a pretty easy play this week, and I think he's a bit underpriced as well. Now, on the flip side of the game, we have James Robinson at 6,600. Now, the problem with him is that the Jaguars are 14-point dogs, so it might not be a high-volume game on the ground, but the guy's been really good all season long. Like, his worst game is 10 points, and he's just been very, very good. He's looked good, too, and he's been well in the passing game. Now, last week, I believe he only had 2 targets, but overall, 4 targets per game and 11% target share. I know that's not, like, amazing numbers, but it's not that bad, and he's been a guy getting around 20-plus touches a game, averaging nearly 17 rushing attempts per game, and it's a very good matchup versus the Green Bay Packers. They suck versus running backs. They're 20th DVA versus the run, and they're allowing 35 DraftKings points per game, which is the second most in the league, and nearly 1.5 rushing touchdowns per game as well. And they're kind of getting beat up through the air, allowing nearly 60 receiving yards per game, and we've seen James Robinson definitely have a role in the passing game, so I do think he's a very solid option. I think he's a bit underpriced as well. He was around $7,000 last week. Do I think he's an absolute necessity on the slate? I don't, because they are 14-point dogs, and I could see this end up being a very pass-heavy game script in the second half for the Jaguars, but I mean, I think the price is nice, and he's been very productive this season. Now, Miles Sanders, $6,400. He is questionable, but if he happens to be good to go in this game and it's just a full go, $6,400 is a really nice price tag for him. But I'm not going to go too in-depth here just because we don't know if he's going to end up playing, but he's going to be back in practice, and I just like the price point. He's been productive in his games this season for the most part. Just looking at his game log, 21-14, had 9 versus San Francisco, but then 23-15, so I do like Miles Sanders here. We know he's going to be involved in the passing game when he's on the field as well, so it's just going to have to wait and see how practice goes throughout the week, but if he's a full go, man, I like Miles Sanders quite a bit. And the matchup versus the Giants, they're 11th DVA versus the run, but they're still 22nd versus running backs, allowing nearly 26 DraftKings points per game, and they're giving up over 6.5 catches and around 60 receiving yards per game as well. So I think it fits Miles Sanders well, and I think he'd be a very, very strong option. Just going to have to wait and see there. Chase Edmonds, 6,300. The volume was certainly there, and if I was going to tell you guys last week if Chase Edmonds was going to come in that game and get around 30 touches, I think we would have all just absolutely jammed him in our lineups, but the guy he sucked. Like, he just didn't do anything really. But like I said, the volume was there. He had 25 carries, but it only amounted to 70 yards, not getting to the end zone. And he only had 3 targets, and he caught 3 of them, but it was only for 18 yards, so it wasn't a good game at all for Chase Edmonds. But I definitely like this game for fantasy purposes. I mean, 56.5 point over-under, nearly 30-point implied team total. We're going to have to see what Kenyon Drake's status is throughout the week. If he doesn't play, I think Chase Edmonds is in a really good spot. It could be a nice bounce-back post-hype play. That's what I call it. When a guy's really chalky the week before that and they bust, you can always go back to the well next week, and it's another good situation versus Buffalo. And I would assume his ownership's going to be lower because people don't like getting burned by the same guy week after week. That's what Tyler Lockett has done to me. I'm willing to go back to the Tyler Lockett well. We'll talk about him when we go to the wide receiver section, but I can get down for some Chase Edmonds once again. The price is a little bit lower, and it's a good matchup versus Buffalo. They're 22nd DVA versus the run this season, allowing nearly 25 DraftKings points per game and over 100 rushing yards per game as well. And we saw Chase Edmonds. He was the absolute guy in that game. Had nearly 30 touches, so I could definitely be in on him again if Kenyon Drake happens to be out. It's just I don't think he's going to be as efficient as we thought he would be. Then getting down into the 5K range, we have Duke Johnson at $5,000. Now, this is contingent on David Johnson missing the game. He's got a concussion, so it's not like he's dealing with a leg injury or anything. We're just going to have to wait and see if he's cleared. If he is not cleared and Duke Johnson is the RB1, I would be all about that at $5,000 versus his old team in Cleveland. So I could definitely see a nice revenge narrative there as well. He's a capable pass catcher running back too, so it gives him a nice floor, but mainly just a price thing here, and I think this game's going to have a pretty high total when it's all said and done. And right now it's at 53.5, and I could see both teams putting up 30 points, so definitely would be in on Duke Johnson if David Johnson happens to be out. J.D. McKissick, 4,900. He was just like a full-time receiver in that last game. Like, it was check down city for Alex Smith, and I could see that happening again, but McKissick, he had 14 targets in this game. That is crazy. There's a lot of wide receivers that wish they could get 14 targets. McKissick as a running back out of the backfield had 14 targets last week, and on the season, he's been always been involved as a pass catcher, about 6 targets per game. Now, I know that can be a little bit inflated from the 14 target game we saw last week, but a 17% target share. And it's a great matchup versus Detroit. They're giving up the most points per game to running backs at 35.8, and they're 20-50 versus the run. So I definitely like McKissick at $4,900. And I don't think he's gonna get 14 targets again, but if he's used in a similar way with Alex Smith, thinking of McKissick, I mean, he should be able to hit value at $4,900 just through the air alone. Then Mike Davis, $4,000. It sounds like Christian McCaffrey is going to be out this week. He is highly in doubt, which I think would mean they're going to sit him out. But Mike Davis, $4,000. This would be the easy lock of the slate. I don't know how you'd pass him up at $4,000. I realize the matchup is absolutely trash versus Tampa Bay. I mean, they are just super good versus the run. Third DVOA and allowing the 12th fewest points per game and like 55 receiving yards per game. But Mike Davis, we know he's a capable pass catching running back. He has a 16.5% target share in the season. And the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, they're actually giving up nearly 7 catches per game to running back. So I think that would at least fit Mike Davis well. I know the few games prior to Christian McCaffrey coming back, he he was up here and then he went down. But I mean, he was very productive earlier on the season. $4,000, you don't need much, and with the opportunity he's going to have, should have around 20 touches, and that's good enough for me at $4,000. So would definitely be all about Mike Davis as long as Christian McCaffrey happens to miss this week, which it sounds like that's going to be the case. And now we'll move on to the wide receiver position, and up top we have the wide receiver 1 this season. It's Davante Adams at $9,000. The guy is just too good. He is Aaron Rodgers' really only good option to get the ball to. I know MVS had 2 touchdowns last week, but Adams is like the only super skilled player on this offense besides Aaron Jones, but I'm talking about pass catchers. I know Aaron Jones can catch the ball as well, but I mean wide receivers, tight ends. And Adams is just too good. And if Mike Davis, if he's the RB1, you could fit in a guy like Davante Adams this week, because that would certainly open up some salary. I don't think you absolutely have to play Davante Adams, but man, that's a really good spot versus Jacksonville. In the past 3 weeks for Davante Adams, 47, 30, 36, and then week 1 in Minnesota versus Minnesota, he had 44.6 points. Like, the guy has had some monster games this season, besides Tampa Bay, where Aaron Rodgers just kind of sucked in that game. And then Detroit, he got hurt late in the game, and they were up, so he didn't really have to play. So, really, besides those 2 weeks, he has been an absolute monster, and I think we just see the trend continue here. It's a good spot versus Jacksonville. His numbers on the season, nearly a 35% target share, nearly 80% weighted opportunity share. You guys don't need to read the numbers. They're good. It's Davante Adams. And their 32nd DVA versus the pass. So what more do you want from Davante Adams this week? He should be able to smash. It's just a matter of being able to afford him. Would I love to be able to smash him in? Sure. But it's a really hefty price tag, but we potentially have some nice value on this slate, especially Keelan Cole. For this guy happens to miss, that could open up some more value. Not saying Keelan Cole is the absolute smash play that Mike Davis is, but it's definitely a nice price tag, and it would correlate well with Davante Adams too, kind of. But anyway, let's get down to Cooper Kupp, $6,900, and then we have his teammate Robert Woods at $6,600. We're just kind of group them together to make this a little bit quicker, but I view them as pretty much the same play here. So really, it's just take your pick. Kupp's coming off a 20 target game. Now you got to keep in mind, Jared Goff threw the ball over 60 times in that game, which is not something that's going to happen again, more than likely. But these guys pretty much the same play. Now Cooper Kupp's been a little bit more targeted this season, about 3 more targets per game. He's also got a 26% target share compared to about a 20% target share. But I like both of these guys. If you need $300 in savings to go with Woods, do that. If you want to play both with Jared Goff, I'm all fine with that as well. I mean, this game should be good for fantasy. 55.5 point over-under, only a 2-point spread, and excellent matchup versus Seattle. I mean, they are just the worst team in the league versus wide receivers, allowing 63.2 points per game to the position, which is dead last, obviously, and an insane near 300 receiving yards per game just to the wide receiver position, and their 29th DVA versus the pass. So, like both of those guys quite a bit, and I would not be surprised if both put up 20-plus points here. Then in that same game, like, you could potentially do this, like a Jared Goff, Cooper Kupp, Robert Woods, and then run it back with Tyler Lockett stack. Now, I know Lockett has been very, very disappointing the past, 3 or 4 weeks besides that huge game versus Arizona, and I keep saying it, Tyler Lockett, I don't think he's as good as DK Metcalf. I don't think that's a hot take by any means. DK Metcalf is an absolute monster. He's going to be an absolute stud for years to come, but Tyler Lockett's so cheap, and we've seen him have those huge games that DK Metcalf's having, and I mean, Tyler Lockett had one of the best games in fantasy history, that one Sunday night, versus the Cardinals. It's just, man, he's been so bad, but I feel like people are going to be off of Tyler Lockett now. He's burned us 2 weeks in a row now, So this could be a nice post-hype play. He's still getting about 9 targets per game, over 6.5 catches per game, and he's always going to see the softer matchup between him and DK Metcalf, because DK Metcalf is going to obviously garner the defense's attention because the guy's an absolute stud. So I pretty much just like the price tag, and I view him as more of a tournament play. I think we can get out of him on cash games, but he's due for another big game, and I think he's a nice post-hype play versus the Rams, and which should be a really good game for fantasy purposes. Brandon Cooks, $5,600. He's been good for about a month now, and he's been heavily targeted as well. His past 4 games he's played, 9 targets, 9 targets, 9 targets, and 12 targets. Had a nice 57-yard touchdown last week, and it wasn't a bomb. It was actually a short drag route where just kind of zipped through the defense a little bit, but if he's going to be super involved like he has been the past month now, and a really good matchup versus Cleveland, I'm all about that. I think Will Fuller's a good play as well, but I mean, I just take the cheaper option of Brandon Cooks, so I think we can get somewhat similar production there. And looking at Cleveland's numbers on the season, they are 28th versus wide receivers, allowing nearly 40, not nearly 45, they are allowing 45, but 45.7 DraftKings points per game of the position, and they're 20th DVA versus the pass. And I know Denzel Ward's a pretty good corner. I'd assume he's going to be on Will Fuller, but he should be able to be on both for the most part. But Brandon Cooks, $5,600. I could see him definitely burning this Browns secondary deep because, man, there's some bad guys in that secondary for sure. So I definitely like Brandon Cooks, and he'd be an obvious pairing with Deshaun Watson. Then Deontay Johnson at $5,200. So, man, Pittsburgh really killed me last week because I was very, very high on James Conner. I thought it was just an absolute perfect spot there. We're going to crush Dallas. They're going to run the ball the entire game. Well, James Conner, he didn't even get 10 rushing attempts, I don't think. And it was, I don't think he did, though. But it was just awful. They fell from behind, and it seemed like the entire second half, they just threw the football the entire game. And just, man, it was just so infuriating owning James Conner. I know he got benched for a series or two, and they were using Snell and McFarland. It was ugly situation there, but Deontay Johnson, he saw double-digit targets, and when he's been on the field, because if you're looking at his numbers this season, they're going to be a bit skewed, because he's left many games early on, so he's only got a 20% target share, and the targets per game are at 7.43, but in the games he's been healthy and played the whole time, he's got around a 30% target share, so it's a good spot here. Versus the Cincinnati Bengals, overall just not a very good defense. On the season, they're kind of mid-range versus wide receivers, but if Deontay Johnson's going to get us around 10 targets in a really good matchup, I will take it. I think he's a fine option. The guy's just a little bit underpriced in my opinion. Then Keelan Cole, $3,400. Sounds like Laviska Shenault might be out this week. If he is, Keelan Cole is going to have a bit of an expanded role. Now, I know Shenault left the game early last week, and Cole didn't really do anything at all, but at $3,400, they should be trailing this game versus Green Bay. I think he's a fine option just for the cheap, and that's about as far as I can really go there. And the thing is, Alexander's going to be all over DJ Chark, so that means whoever else is the wide receiver 2, wide receiver 3, they're going to have a much softer matchup here, so I could definitely get on some Keelan Cole at a really cheap price point of $3,400. Then moving on to the tight end position, just kind of a bunch of mid-range guys here besides Darren Waller. He's about $6,000. I think he should be more expensive each and every single week. Like he had double-digit targets last week. He got into the end zone, and this should be a decent game for fantasy. It might be a sneaky game. It's got a 52-point over/under, but the Raiders and the Broncos don't really get you too excited. But these are two not very good defenses, so I could definitely see some points being scored. And we know Waller is pretty much Derek Carr's number 1 target, about 8.5 targets per game on the season. 57% weight opportunity share, and your 30% target share. So Darren Waller, he's fine from a volume standpoint. And if we look at how Denver is specifically versus tight ends, they're only giving up the 13th fewest points per game. They're 12th DVA versus the pass, but overall, this is not a defense that scares me. And Waller's just a good talent, and he's going to get plenty of volume. Evan Ingram got his first touchdown of the year last week, and this is a good matchup versus Philly. They're a team that has struggled versus tight ends this season, allowing 17 DraftKings points per game, which is the 4th most in the league, and nearly receiving touchdown per game as well. And Evan Ingram is obviously a talented tight end. He's just on a pretty bad offense for the most part, but about 6.5 targets per game. I think Ingram's fine at $4,500. Then we have Eric Ebron, who's actually been playing well the past month. And individually, it's a very good matchup versus Cincy. Now, overall, they're not a good defense, but versus tight ends, they have really struggled this season. But you scroll over there, they're actually going with the 2nd most points per game, only behind the Atlanta Falcons, 17.7 DraftKings points per game, and their 25th DVA versus the pass. So Eric Ebron, I think he's a fine option. I don't love him, but I think he's a nice, solid mid-range tight end this week. But Dallas Goedert, I could see him being very popular. So he's going to be back this week, $4,200. It's a good matchup versus the Giants, and there's no Zach Ertz. So he's going to be the main guy here. We know Carson Wentz likes getting the ball to tight ends, and Dallas Goedert is a very talented tight end. So I definitely think he's one of the best plays on the site at his position. I think he's a little bit too cheap. Now, versus tight ends specifically, they're giving the 9th fewest points per game, but they're 28th DVA versus the pass, and Goddard's just a talented tight end, so I'm not really too concerned about that. I definitely think he's a good option. Then Austin Hooper at $3,900. He's going to be back this week after the appendix thing kept him out the past 2 weeks, and then the bye week as well. But I like this game a lot for fantasy purposes. A 53.5 point over/under, 28.5 implied team total for the Cleveland Browns. Now I know Baker Mayfield's on the COVID list, but it sounds like he should be able to be back by Wednesday, so I'm not going to be overly concerned about that. Even if he was out, he's only $3,900. I think Case Keenum should be able to get him the ball, but we know Baker Mayfield likes getting the ball to tight ends, and Austin Hooper we know is a talented tight end. I think he's a bit underpriced here, and the matchup versus Houston specifically, good one. They're 25th versus tight ends, allowing nearly 25. I wish nearly 15 DraftKings points per game to the position. So I like Austin Hooper's price point. I think there's a nice litter of mid-range and cheap tight ends this week for sure. Then the defenses, they are what they are. I mean, it's just, I hate playing defenses each and every single week. I wish DraftKings got rid of them, but we got to play them. But Packers are 14-point favorites at home. That sets up well. Eagles, 3,600 going up against the New York Giants. They're 3-point favorites. Whatever. The Saints, 3,000. I actually like the Saints quite a bit here. I know they're not the best defense in the world, but they're playing at home. They're going up against the 49ers. But, I mean, it's not the greatest offense in the world. I know Richie James went off last week, but I'm not sure if that's going to really happen again. And they're 9.5 point favorites, so I could get down with the Saints at 3K. And the Lions, 2,600 going up against Washington. Kyle Allen got hurt. I'm not really sure that's much of a difference from Alex Smith. Alex Smith wasn't, well, the end result, yardage-wise, wasn't bad, but he did have some interceptions there. But there's no team total out yet for this game or an over-under, but they are 4-point favorites right now, and they're playing at home, and I'm not too scared of the Washington football team's offense. So maybe outside of Terry McLaurin and J.D. McKissick, but I think overall the Lions at 2,600, definitely a nice value defense this week. And with that being said, guys, that's going to be it for this video, and I hope it was helpful. If it was, make sure you leave a like, and if you're new to the channel, hit the subscribe button. It really helps me out. I really do appreciate it. If you don't follow the socials, like I said earlier, left-hand corner of your screen. If you want to support the channel over on Patreon, that is always much appreciated. Just links down below for that. It's like $10 a month, and have the entire spreadsheet there, projections, cheat sheet, all that fun stuff. So I'm going to get out here, guys. Hope you have a great start to your week, and hopefully next weekend can get here soon enough. See you guys in the next one, which is either going to be the studs video or the showdown video.